readers, thanks for being here with me today as I edit an anonymous historical fiction first chapter. It's the writer's debut novel, and she has not had much feedback on this or her writing yet. So until she's ready, going anonymous is always an option for my flash edits. Before we get started, there's a bonus at the end of this video for creating great dialogue. And even better, I'd like to also offer another video to help new writers create powerful openers and the most common mistakes for first chapters. Click the link in the corner and check it out. If you notice, chapter 1 starts 10 years later, and that's because there is a prologue. For the sake of video time, I will not be addressing everything in the prologue, and I will only be editing the first 7 pages out of 16, as this is a robust chapter. But even within the first 7 pages, the writer will get help with valuable solutions like prose, dialogue, show versus tell, characterization, and creating a strong opener to hook the reader. Before we get started, let's look at some basics for prologues. Don't worry, I'll make it quick. Okay. To prologue or not to prologue? If you ask most editors and agents, they think a prologue should really just start at chapter 1. Do readers like them? I think it's a 50-50 toss-up. If you really want to do a prologue, I suggest reading as many best-selling books in your genre with prologues as possible. A prologue should have a purpose that cannot be accomplished by a first chapter. Use prologues as a way to give a peek into the spark that started the events. This can be a flashback, which is often used for historical fiction, but literally just give a glimpse to the reader, not the encyclopedia of events. It can also be used for creating a suspenseful thriller. If the prologue shows the main character with blood on their hands, then the reader wants to find out to see what happens. But then again, this can all be accomplished in the first chapter as well. A prologue is also a place for your character's backstory, but be careful of the notorious info dumping. Backstory is generally something that is developed along with your character, so again, that can be sprinkled in throughout the chapters. Can you do all this in the exposition and prose starting with chapter 1? Absolutely. So make sure your prologue is necessary, meaningful, and most importantly, a powerful opener, because remember, this is the first thing your readers will judge you and the story on. Since this prologue didn't include must-have information for us about the characters or the world, it's not vital for jumping into chapter 1. So let's get started. First of all, I just want to address the formatting. The formatting was pretty messy, so I needed to have it in just a standard formatting. If you don't know what standard formatting is, I'll drop a link in the description below to a blog that I have. It gives you a template and just kind of the basics of the formatting that you should just go ahead and start your whole story in. And that way you don't have to fix it afterwards. But it is really important to do this before you send it off to beta readers, editors, and agents, because there is a standard format for the industry. Okay, one important thing I want to disclose about revising a first chapter. It's important not to get hung up on any of it until you're basically done with the whole novel, because once you finish the end, it's likely it could change your beginning. Plus, if you keep editing the first chapter, you'll never get through the damn thing. So finish your work, go back, and really work on a powerful opener. So let's take a look at hers. But first, look down here at the word count, 4,618. And that is without the prologue. It's a long first chapter. Is it a deal breaker? Definitely not. But let's review the importance of chapters and their length. Number 1, chapters affect pacing and how you want your reader to feel. Number 2, chapters help your readers stay in the story. Not only are they like mini goals to a busy, tired mom of 3 at the end of the night while she's reading with one eye open, but they are almost like a rhythmic formula where a problem is presented or a resolution and ends with some kind of cliffhanger or teaser to get your reader to flip to the next chapter. So, is the number of word count per chapter important? The number is not as important as the quality prose being poured into it. All right, let's look at the opener. The snake whipped at its prey. Its sensuously sinuous form contorted taut as it wound itself around the mouse in a vice-like grip. The mouse writhed tortuously in the ugly, cruel embrace. A flash. Fang sunk into furred skin. Black slits dilated into soulless orbs. Bulging eyes pulled red. The mouse spasmed anew. All right, so the first scene is a graphic encounter of a snake attacking a mouse. Let's look at the pros and cons to this. The pros, I'd say it sets a tone. The cons, well, you want to ground the reader by introducing the characters or the setting. This can work though, and be interesting if you do two things. Make sure this is symbolic to the story, and make it short and easy to read. The first couple of lines tripped me up a little bit, and let's see why it's doing that. These are what we would call convoluted sentences, and it's super common for new writers. Really, even I've seen seasoned writers do it. It's a stylistic choice, but it's not an easy read for the reader, and it will immediately pull most of your readers out of the flow of the story and maybe even annoy them just a little bit. So we want to avoid that. All right. The best advice for making sure that your sentences are clean is to read them out loud. It's sensuously sinuous form contorted taut. That is almost like a tongue twister, and it's way too many it's, since, it's a lot of S's. So find a simpler way to convey exactly what you want to say. Leave out some of the adverbs. You have two back-to-back, tortuously and sensuously. I just would leave them out. Fangs sunk into furred skin. Black slits dilated into soulless orbs. Bulging eyes pulled red. I think you can condense all this into two sentences. Okay. I actually think this would be a really cool opener. Now let's get to I. Let's find out who your character is. I could and I could. Let's avoid this repetition. How about just saying, my eyes remained fixed on the act. Refusing to give in to the building shivers. Building kind of sounds like a structure to me. How about using it for an adjective, mounting or growing might work better here. I seized the moment, grasping the snake by its venom glands, and unlatched it from the mouse's neck. Without taking a breath, I dropped the snake into the basket at my feet and hastily placed the lid atop. Sealing it in, I silently reminded myself to place it somewhere more secure, lest Renata, my maid, happen upon it. Again, you have an unnecessary adverb here. I'm not going to be too hard on you for adverbs because it's a learning process. But what adverbs actually do is they cheat showing, and they often tell. So use some body language. All right. In this next sentence, you have placed and place. Oh, it's two different sentences, but still it's a little repetitive. And then you have another, I silently. So again, this is all show. And what also happens is whenever I dropped something, I do this, I seized, I could not do this. It becomes a lot of I's. If you notice, I needed this, I fed, I had. There's a lot of I's, and that is really normal. So let me show you some tips on how to avoid using so many I's. Option 1, prepositional phrases. Avoid, I was tired of running, I hatched a plan to escape, I looked around listening for footsteps. Instead, use, peeking from behind the tree, I saw the hooded figure. So you insert a prepositional phrase in front of that I so that it's not at least every sentence starting with I. Option 2, avoid filter words. Filter words make your writing weak and often indicate telling rather than showing. So avoid, I heard a sinister laugh in the darkness. Use instead, a sinister laugh echoed in the darkness. I'll send you my 45 words to cut. It really helps with all these filter words. It's part of my free mini self-editing masterclass, and I can also drop the link in the description below for anybody else that wants to check that out. Option 3, setting descriptions. Include additional setting descriptions to break up the actions. Describe what your character sees, hears, and smells. But remember, avoid, I saw the clouds turn black in the horizon. Instead, use, the clouds turned from gray to black, casting pockets of shadow across the path. So see, you avoid I saw completely. Option 4, Add internal dialogue. How is your character dealing with their world or current situation? Dive into your character's viewpoint of things. Avoid, I thought to myself, I knew I never wanted to leave this place. Instead, use, this is alive. Who in their right mind would ever leave this place? All right, you want the sentences to flow, so just be careful with too many Old English words. And you probably don't need these around made, but that would have to wait. I needed to work fast. Again, I needed. Maybe just bring up that time was running out. Also, this sentence looks like it's missing a little bit of context because we don't really know what's happening, what would have to wait, and I needed to work fast. Why? So don't forget, we need context. Picking up a small ivory implement, I fed it through the mouse's slack mouth until it reached all the way to the back of its throat. You can get rid of that. We don't want to I then something. I reached, we got a double word again. Reached and reached back to back. I reached for my mortar containing an earth-based preparation that I loosened with water and proceeded to pour a few drops in the implement. As I did so, so you don't want to do a step-by-step. I then did something, I proceeded, as I did so. Just describe what the sickening smell was. So just start with, and that's great because that is using your senses, and I love to see this. Kudos. Even though it's a sickening sweet smell, so it's heavy on the S's, but I think you can play around with that in your revisions. Wafted up from the concoction, making me suspect the goat's blood it contained was not the freshest. I'm not even sure what's happening here. This vague description of earth-based preparation and your concoction, we have no idea why there's now talk about goat's blood. So just make it clear early on or earlier. Because remember, every sentence must do one of two things. Reveal the character, advance the action. I cursed the butcher who I acquired it from, even as I offered up a silent prayer that the oversight would not compromise its efficacy. All right, make every sentence easy to read. Flow. Now I must wait. Got a tense shift. So everything's been in past tense. Just look out for that. And it's probably not even necessary, so you can just delete it. Hearing a noise at the window, I turned, my heart leaping into my mouth. The drawn curtains were moving. Moved. They moved. But let's also add something here. I would take that out, but I would also, here's a good place to paint a picture of your setting. I prefer to do it actually earlier on, if possible, but once you condense your opener and you condense all these paragraphs, then this setting description will come at a good time. So we want to know, what time of day is it? And obviously you don't want to tell us, so just say something about the sky or the weather. Because whenever this snake opener happened, I assumed that they were outside. And now they're inside with curtains. So this needs to be explained a little bit more about their setting. Okay, and while we're here, we're about midway through page 1. I still don't know if our main character here, all these eyes, who they are. Who do these eyes belong to? Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it a man? Is it an old lady? Let's distinguish that as well. And let's do it early on too. You need to connect the reader straight away with the main character. When your reader feels connected to your character, the reader will continue to read your work. Yes, plot and setting are important, but honestly, characters will stick with the reader long after the excitement of the action and place have worn off. So do a character profile sheet if you haven't already. You should do this for all of your characters, but definitely your main character, because then you can sprinkle in little pieces of information about the character to give us a sense of who this person is and why we want to read about them. We need to be hooked to know what's going to happen, to care what's going to happen, all that stuff. So here's some tips. Give the reader at least one character to root for. Introduce your main character in the first page, and no later than the third. When you introduce them, you do not have to overload with physical descriptions. Let the reader use their imagination, but do sprinkle little bits of information about them. I have an example for you on a good way to do this without telling. You don't have to overly simplify, and you don't want to just tell your reader. For instance, Maisie was an animal lover. Okay, well, you need to make use of specific details to take you out of the amateur writing box, but also to remember to use easy flowing sentences. You don't have to hit your thesaurus. You don't have to make the sentences difficult or smarter feeling. Just keep them simple with details that actually characterize and bring the reader in. So something like this. Every night, Maisie feeds her 11-pound cavapoo all the best parts of what should have been John's T-bone. So this is how you characterize. 1, you haven't used she, he, I, and this gives a lot of details about Maisie without saying something like Maisie was an animal lover. Okay, another thing, make your character likable or relatable. Drop little hints to us. Give them flaws, some weaknesses. Show us these things, certain tics. And don't forget, try to do this for all of your characters. Don't forget about showing some feelings. If we were to look back at the opening scene and then her action of using the implements, hiding the snake, feeding some kind of concoction of goat's blood to the mouse, we never really got a sense of what the character was feeling as any of these things progress. Yes, we've got a feeling here, but give us more feeling as the actions are happening. This will also break out all that overused pronoun and help filter out some of the words. It helps to bring in some of the 5 senses. That's a lot of good showing. And feelings usually come out in their behavior and body language. But don't forget dialogue and the 5 senses. So last one, dialogue is a great way to show characterization. It gives us a glimpse into your character without telling us from the narrator's point of view. I rose quickly and closed it before drawing the curtains more tightly together, barring entrance to any slivers of morning light that tried to infiltrate the darkness of the room. What position was she rising from? Either clarify that she was in some kind of a kneeling or laying down position, or there's no need to even really put this in there right now. More tightly together. Don't really need that. It's a little redundant and it sounds kind of awkward in the sentence, and you already have drawing the curtains. I think that's good enough there. Morning light, yay, we know what time of day it is that we are working in. Great. Let's try to incorporate this a little bit earlier on. I kept the room as dark as possible when carrying out my experiments on account of Zephyr's profound aversion to sunlight. Okay. I love that we get a little glimpse into who she is. Great characterization. Let's also see this a little earlier on. We want to know more about the character, so we care about reading what happens to her. Just to make it a little easier to flow, you can always just say, because of Zephyr, we don't know who Zephyr is. Because of Zephyr's profound aversion, probably unnecessary to even have that in there. Just keep it flowing. I returned to my seat and turned my attention back to the matter at hand. Oh, how I'd hoped it would work. It's being a little bit vague. We still don't really know what's going on. Just explain to the reader a little bit better about who she is, what kind of experiment she's really working on, because we're now nearing the bottom of page 2, and it's still a little vague. Ever since I had witnessed Pollyanna's cure a boy of a snake bite right before my very eyes in the middle of the Mercato Vecchio on market day, I was determined to find out the recipe for the antidote they referred to as St. Paul's Earth. These men claimed to be descendant from the Apostle Paul and alleged to have inherited from him an immunity to snakebite. Not only this, but they were thought to cure such afflictions by an inherited grace. I think this would make a lot more sense if we knew a little bit more about the character. And if we knew a little bit more about the era before you use these kind of historical references, there needs to be context around them so that we understand what you know, because you're the historical researcher or probably have some sort of a history major. And this is really common for writers that do have a history major, is that they insert a lot of this information in the exposition, and the reader that is not as well versed in this era will have no idea and will probably either start skimming over exposition or just kind of get fed up with it. So I would recommend to always have context around any kind of historical references. And unless historical information is absolutely vital to the story, then I would just skip it altogether. I've edited a lot of historical fiction. I write historical fiction, but if you're not familiar with a particular era or region, it's just not going to make sense to you. From the Apostle Paul, again, we just don't really know who these people are, so let's put more context or eliminate it altogether. Not only this, but they were taught to cure such afflictions by an inherited grace. I don't see that really doing much for the sentence, and I would go ahead and consider deleting it. I was not so gullible as to believe such wish-wash. Apply smoother just without that. You can probably eliminate the I was and just say that it was either all of this was kind of hard to believe. You don't even have to say I was not so gullible to believe such wish-wash, and I do believe that this is probably an 18th or 19th century term, so just make sure that your slang matches with your era. On that day, I approached the Pollyannists with a great banner depicting a bed of snakes on one side and St. Paul on the other. To my dismay and increasing frustration, however, I found no amount of wheedling or gold coin would loosen his lips. I don't hate begrudgingly, but it's a little convoluted of an adverb, so always consider whenever you read these out loud, do they flow with your sentence? Always simplify. Paid him a few quattrini, and with the supposedly miraculous elixir in hand, I eagerly set off for home, resolved to uncover its secrets for myself. After weeks of deliberating over each individual ingredient and seeking counsel from the most learned of minds, see how that stopped me immediately because it just didn't sound right, it didn't look right. It's going to do the same thing to other readers, so just make it flow, simplify. Including that of my mentor, the Jewish physician, I came to the conclusion that the concoction was comprised of juniper seed, goat's blood, and oil scorpions. As well as these, I had it on good authority that the magic ingredient, so to speak, was a medical clay from the Greek island of Lemnos, said to possess anti-poison properties. It was by no means easy to come by and cost a pretty coin to procure. I only hoped my pains bore fruit. I would actually consider moving either all of this exposition for just a little bit later, or sprinkling in some of it here and there, or just condensing it almost completely. Because right now we still don't really know that much about the character, and this doesn't tell us that much. It tells us a lot about an era and potential groups of people, men, that we don't really know anything about, and we don't know the context around why we need to know them and what that has to do with our character or the plot of the story. And so that's what you need to focus on with your exposition. While it was true that no life hung in the balance, excepting the poor little mouses, my insatiable thirst for knowledge was indeed a matter of urgency. For a woman, and a noble one at that, I took uncommon delight in studying the animal kingdom, discovering the secrets held between the pages of their skin and bones. Okay, so this, I actually appreciate that we know a little bit about her, and this is what we've been missing for the last 3 pages, but this is also telling. What can you do to show this? You can show characterization through actions, body language, emotions, and a great way to get to know a character is to throw them in a conversation with another character. And I think right now that would be a great thing to do. Dialogue is a great place to get to know people and see how they interact with other people. Yet as I watched the mouse labor to take its final breath, my excitement was replaced yet again by disappointment. I heaved a sigh. All my work had come to naught. A knock sounded at the door. All right, something is happening. This is great. So I'm looking forward to the plot to progress and for other characters to come in, or at least get a glimpse at a greater conflict. I always like to know what the scene looks like. You don't have to make it long, but just give a couple of details about her room. This is actually really good for a characterization as well. Again, we have this phantom getting up, getting down scenario. I grabbed the dead mouse by the tail and threw it into the waiting jaws of Zephyr. Okay, so Zephyr the snake, I guess we know now. Giving the basket a quick kick with my foot, I managed to push it under my vanity table just as Renata bustled through the door. I'll probably just end it there and start a new sentence. Her face thankfully obscured by the large vase of flowers she was carrying. I quickly always remove these. I threw the apparatus and gloves in the drawer and placed the whatever pitcher, basin, towels, combs, and cosmetic jars back in their usual place on my vanity with an indiscreet clatter. Okay, I just wanted to point out you did a really good job here of showing. You could have just said that you hid things from your maid. This is a great job showing. Not knowing where to put the heavy tome on Galen, I resolved to simply placing it on my seat before unceremoniously sitting myself atop of it. Okay, so if you notice how I read that, is how other readers are also going to read it. It doesn't flow. And that's just, it's just really common for new writers to figure out how to get their prose and syntax to be a little bit less difficult. And I have no idea what this references at all. This just came out of nowhere. You could probably delete it. I resolved to simply placing it atop unceremoniously. I'd recommend just deleting that. I mean, I don't know how many syllables that is, unceremoniously, but it's a lot. And so let's just keep it smooth, keep it flowing. Oh, yay, we have dialogue. I'm excited to see this. I would recommend putting the dialogue a little bit earlier on because it's a really great way to show characterization. Good morning, Ariadne, Renata said to the bed. Well, that's weird. As she sat, I think you're just missing an article here. No worries. Setting the vase down on my bedside table, finally noticing my absence. Okay, finally is just another filter word, so we can get rid of that. Her eyes darted about the darkened chamber before finding me on the other side of the room. She narrowed her eyes, taking in my position at the vanity. The lone candle, the only source of light in the room. Ariadne, what are you doing sitting over there in the dark? She asked. Her voice tinged with suspicion. She moved to draw the damask curtains. Maybe she just drew back instead of having to move and draw. All right, I just want to point out I said lightly. Again, we want to avoid adverbs and dialogue tags. So for the sake of video time, I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but I want to leave with some really crucial and important tips for dialogue. Make dialogue serve a purpose, always. My professors, fellow editors, and agents constantly say dialogue should never just be a fluff of conversation. It must characterize, show us who the characters are, and connect the reader to those characters. It must also propel the plot. Never ever just have a back and forth conversation full of unnecessary fillers. Like, hey, how are you today? I'm good, thanks for asking. You? I know it's a little bit extreme, but just keep in mind no small talk. And never fill in exposition, stuff that the other person in the conversation would otherwise already know, but you as the writer is just injecting historical facts or backstory just for the heck of it. It must also expose the conflict. The best dialogue happens when conflict is exposed and tension increases between two problems or people. Not only must dialogue serve a purpose, but you need to learn all you can about subtext. It's a tricky one. Subtext is the show, don't tell of dialogue. And like I said, it's tricky to master as your descriptive prose. It's what your characters are really saying minus the words they actually speak. So if you ever hear the term on the nose, it means your dialogue is stating words without subtext. And basically it just makes for boring dialogue. So study and practice. But here are a few quick tips for good dialogue. Make sure everyone has a unique voice. Do you talk to your partner the same way you talk to your boss? Some characters, well, most, have such unique voices that without the tag, you know exactly who is speaking. That doesn't mean you need to have an obnoxious dialect for each character. And remember, characters have traits that are in common. Best advice, get to know them, fill out my character profile sheets. Next one, incorporate a good balance of dialogue and narration. It really helps to break up big chunks of narration, which can overwhelm the reader. And don't wait until page 6 to start your dialogue. Remember, it's a great way to show and characterize. Next, use it to layer, or as I always say, sprinkle in backstory, but never info dump. People don't naturally do that in conversation. Next, don't write stilted dialogue. No one speaks in perfect grammar. Run-ons and conjunctions are natural. And last, don't forget body language. Super important to convey emotion and meaning into the tone of the dialogue. And movement and background noises are natural in any conversation. So that's a wrap. Thanks for joining. I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe, and drop a comment if you'd like to get your first chapter, blurb, or query letter edited. And thanks to this lovely writer, I wish you all the best, and I'm excited for your rewrites. Because remember, that's where the magic happens in writing. If you're looking for an all-women's writer group, click the link below, and I'd love to hear what you're writing. Cheers!